What would you do if the seat you paid for was quietly handed to someone else just because of the color of your skin? What if you spent your whole life playing by the rules, only to find out that those rules don't always protect people like you? Imagine sitting in a crowded airport, suitcase in hand, when a single sentence from a gate agent changes everything, sir. You're not on this list. But what if the man they tried to erase wasn't just any passenger? What if he was the very person who wrote the federal laws they just violated? How much power can a single act of quiet resistance truly have? And who will stand with him when silence is no longer an option? This is the story of Julian Cross, a man who turned humiliation into hope, not by shouting, but by standing tall and changing the rules for everyone who would come after him. Are you ready to find out what happens when dignity meets injustice, and history is rewritten in a single afternoon, if you believe in stories that fight for respect and real change? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's begin. The airport was buzzing, not loud, not chaotic, just humming. That low-frequency kind of busy where rolling suitcases sound like a steady drum line and every overhead announcement blurs into background noise. Gate A14 sat quietly at the far end of the concourse, past the overpriced coffee kiosks and the newsstand where glossy covers flashed summer travel tips and celebrity scandals. Julian Cross walked with slow, measured steps. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. Everything he did with time. A well-fitted navy blazer, crisp white collar shirt, charcoal slacks, polished leather shoes, not the kind that screamed status, but the kind that whispered it. His salt and pepper beard was neatly trimmed, and the silver streaks in his short afro only added gravity to his presence. He pulled his small carry-on behind him with the same hand that held his phone, still unlocked on a flight confirmation screen. Seat 3A, business class. He glanced up at the departures board. My flight 3I-27. On time. Boarding in 20 minutes. He exhaled quietly and adjusted the strap on his shoulder bag. Julian Cross had flown more miles in his lifetime than he could count. Some of them for government briefings, some for company acquisitions, most of them for building the very infrastructure that made modern air travel safer, fairer, smarter. But no one knew that. And that was the point. He preferred it that way. He approached the gate. A few passengers were already lined up, some standing too close to the retractable barrier, pretending not to hover. Others were scattered across the vinyl seats nearby. Eyes glazed over with scrolling thumbs. The gate agent stood behind the podium. Young, blonde, sharp blazer. Her name tag read Rebecca. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't rude either. Just locked into efficiency. The kind of practiced hospitality that starts to fray after 7 hours on shift. Julian stood in the pre-board zone, reached into the front pocket of his carry-on, and pulled out his boarding pass. He didn't hand it over. Not yet. Just held it loosely in one hand. The gate agent glanced up, then back to her screen. He waited. The overhead speakers crackled again. Pre-boarding now for Flight 3027 to Chicago O'Hare. Business class, platinum members, and Zone 1 may now board through Gate A14. Julian stepped forward, calmly, confidently, as he had 1,000 times before. "Sir," the gate agent said, stopping him with a quick hand gesture. "Can I help you?" He raised an eyebrow. "Slightly. I'm boarding," he said. She tilted her head, almost reflexively. "This lane is for business class and priority members only." He extended the boarding pass. "Seat 3A. She took it, glanced once, but then her gaze moved past the printed text toward his face, then downward. His shoes, his hand, his skin. Then the pause. Then the shift. "Do you have a photo ID?" she asked. He nodded slowly and reached into his jacket pocket. "Would you like to see it before or after the older white gentleman behind me boards without question?" Her eyes flicked toward the man standing just behind Julian White, balding, tailored, a man in a steel-gray suit who wore his privilege like cologne. The man gave an awkward half-laugh and looked away. "I'm just waiting my turn," he said softly. The gate agent didn't respond. She tapped something into her terminal, frowned, then tapped again. "You're not listed as priority status," she said. Julian didn't flinch. "My company books priority seats every week." She stared at the screen. "Which company?" He glanced up at the overhead monitor, Flight 3027, to Chicago, departing on time. Then he looked back at her. "You don't need to know that," he said. "Calm, direct." "Then I can't let you through," she replied. Julian stayed quiet for a moment. Then he leaned forward and said softly, "You have my boarding pass. You have my ID. What exactly is the issue?" A younger man in line nearby lowered his phone, now silently recording. "You're holding up the line, sir," the agent said. "No," Julian replied. "You are." Another agent approached from behind the counter, whispering something into her earpiece. Rebecca nodded sharply, then turned back toward Julian. "We've reassigned your seat," she said. He blinked once. "Excuse me?" She gestured to the balding man behind him. "Mr. Kincaid has been upgraded to 3A. Julian turned slowly. The man behind him looked embarrassed. "Caught in the middle. I didn't request it," he mumbled. "But they offered." The gate agent nodded. "We've reassigned you to 19C aisle." It wasn't the downgrade that hit Julian first. It was the look in her eyes when she said it. Like it was final. Like it was nothing. He stood very still. His heartbeat stayed steady. But there was something ancient rising in him. Not anger. Not even disappointment. Something older. He folded his boarding pass once. Then again. Placed it carefully back into his jacket. Rebecca turned away to scan the next passenger. Julian didn't move. Not yet. From somewhere near the gate seats, someone whispered, "Is this for real?" Another voice. "Dude had a business seat." She bumped him. Julian turned his head slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of his reflection in the plexiglass beside the gate. He straightened his collar. Then his phone buzzed. Incoming text. "Call with FAA Deputy Director confirmed. 3:45 p.m. Terminal B reserved." He read it, silently, then tucked the phone back in. He looked up at the agent again, and without raising his voice, he said, "I'd suggest you check your manifest again." And that was the moment everything began to shift. Julian Cross didn't move. Not an inch. The gate had resumed boarding. Passengers flowed around him like water around a rock in a river. They glanced his way, some out of curiosity, others trying not to stare too long. But phones were out now. Subtle, discreet, held at thigh level. Screen lights dimmed, but lenses aimed. He could feel them. He didn't care. Rebecca Slade, still standing behind the counter, was tapping nervously now. Her eyes avoided his. Behind her, the second gate agent returned from a call, leaned in to whisper something, and glanced quickly at Julian before turning his eyes back to the screen. Julian didn't speak. He stood with his hands folded in front of him, breathing slowly through his nose. Years of boardrooms, years of being interrupted, years of being the only black man in a room full of assumptions. He had mastered silence, but inside, something knotted beneath his ribs. Do I let it go? Do I board quietly and take the seat they gave me, Wouldn't be the first time. He looked down at the crease in his boarding pass, folded twice, too neatly. He unfolded it. Rebecca finally looked up. "Sir," she said, louder now. "I'll ask again. You've been reassigned. Please step aside so others may board." "I will not," Julian said, calm as still water. "Not until you tell me why my seat was reassigned." She opened her mouth, paused, then answered the question she wanted to answer instead. "We are within policy to reallocate priority seating in real time, especially when accommodating upgraded travelers." Julian tilted his head slightly. "So you upgraded someone else, but not me." Rebecca didn't blink. "Mr. Kincaid is a Platinum Executive member, and I am Julian Prompted." "You're not listed," she replied, almost too quickly. A beat passed. Julian reached into his coat pocket and removed his ID. She took it, scanned it. Her eyes flicked to the screen. Then she frowned. She tapped a few keys, frowned again. The second agent leaned over to look at the screen with her. Then both went still. Rebecca's jaw tightened. She turned back toward Julian. "I'm not sure what your company status is, but your name doesn't appear on today's manifest under any special notation." Julian's voice was low, but firm. "Then check again." The second agent looked nervous now. Another voice rose from the boarding line. A young woman, maybe 17, phone in hand, called out, "Y'all seeing this man had a business ticket and they still made him move. Livestream already up." Julian heard it. He didn't turn. Rebecca did. "Ma'am, please lower your phone," she said. The girl didn't. She just angled it higher. Julian adjusted his stance. He didn't like being recorded, but he liked being erased even less. Another passenger murmured from the waiting area. They moved him for that white guy, right in front of everyone. Julian looked back at Rebecca. "I fly this route nearly every month. Always business, always confirmed. My seat was 3A, and now, without any explanation, I've been bumped for someone who didn't even request the upgrade." Rebecca didn't answer. She was listening to something through her earpiece now. Then she nodded and motioned to someone down the ramp. "Mr. Kincaid returned to the gate, looking mildly annoyed. He stood beside the desk. Rebecca turned to him. "Apologies for the confusion. We're finalizing your seat confirmation now." Kincaid gave Julian a polite smile. "Awkward. No offense, sir. I just go where they tell me." Julian nodded slowly. "That's the problem." There was no anger in his voice, just precision. Rebecca turned back. "Sir, this is a routine reassignment. You're making it unnecessarily difficult." Julian raised both eyebrows. "No," he said. "You made it discriminatory. I'm just not accepting it silently." The line paused. Boarding slowed. A ripple passed through the terminal. Someone said, "This going viral." Another added, "He's not yelling. Just waiting." Rebecca leaned closer to the second agent and whispered something. He looked nervous. Julian took a small breath, closed his eyes for half a second. How many times had this happened in smaller ways? At the hotel desk when they asked if he was the driver. At the conference where they mistook him for tech support. Even on the elevator at his own headquarters when someone handed him their coat. And now here, with a seat he paid for, one that he had booked personally. He opened his eyes again. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "what you're doing is not just impolite, it's illegal. I suggest you look up FAA Policy 14F, Clause 7. She froze. He saw it happen, just behind her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty. She didn't know what that was, but she knew she should. She tapped again. The second agent leaned over and whispered, "Something about an ID tag, a note, a conflict." Then another buzz at the desk. Her red phone line began to blink. Rebecca didn't answer it. Julian did not smirk. He did not move. But his eyes were locked now, not just on her, but on the entire system that allowed this to happen. Again, and again, and again. The terminal had gone quieter. Tiana, the teen girl recording, zoomed in. Her voice on the stream was soft. "He's not arguing. He's just still. But it's like everyone else is starting to realize they messed up." Then the red phone blinked again. The second agent reached for it, picked it up. "Gate A14. Yes, he's still here." A pause, then a deeper pause. He looked up at Julian, then slowly placed the receiver back down. "Mr. Cross," he said carefully, "our operations supervisor would like to speak with you privately. Just over here." Julian looked at him, then at Rebecca. He reached down, picked up his carry-on, and stepped through the side gate without a word. Behind him, the terminal buzzed louder. Passengers murmured. Tiana whispered, "Y'all, something's about to go down." And in her voice was a mixture of awe, curiosity, and something like hope. The hallway behind the gate counter was narrow, lined with beige walls and faded posters about customer service. Julian followed the younger agent in silence. His shoes tapped softly against the tile, the kind of sound that reminded him of waiting rooms and hospital corridors, a place where people tried to act normal while everything inside them was bracing for something they couldn't name yet. The agent opened a glass-paneled door and stepped aside. "In here, sir." Julian entered. A small office with 2 plastic chairs, a desk, a headset, and a terminal that looked a few years outdated. There was a bulletin board with faded staff photos and a laminated emergency protocol. He placed his carry-on gently beside one of the chairs, but didn't sit. The agent fumbled with the phone. "Our supervisor's on her way." Julian nodded. "Thank you." The agent hesitated, then added quietly, I didn't know." Julian looked at him. "Didn't know what the young man shifted. Didn't know you were priority oversight flagged." Julian said nothing at first. Just watched the agent wrestle with his own unease. Then he replied, "That's the problem." A knock. The door opened. A woman in a navy pantsuit entered. Confident posture, mid-40s, short black bob. She wore a badge clipped to her blazer. Noelle Jennings, Terminal Operations Manager. She extended her hand. "Mr. Cross, thank you for waiting. I'm Noelle. I'd like to personally apologize for the inconvenience." He took her hand. Firm grip. No emotion in his expression. She motioned toward the chairs. "May I?" He nodded. She sat. He remained standing. "We're working to understand what happened." She began. "And of course, to make this right." Julian studied her face. She wasn't flustered. She was trained. But she was also aware that something had gone beyond protocol. He finally spoke. "Tell me, Ms. Jennings, if I didn't hold federal clearance, if I wasn't flagged in your back end as a regulatory observer, would I be standing in this room right now?" Noelle blinked, not in surprise, but in realization. "I can't speak for every decision made at the gate, but I can assure you, you can't assure me of anything," Julian interrupted, calm but precise, "because your team already made the decision. The problem isn't that they didn't know who I was." He paused, then looked her squarely in the eyes. "It's that they didn't care to find out. Noelle folded her hands on her lap. I understand this moment carries weight. More than just a seat assignment. Julian said nothing. Inside, he felt something stirring. That deep, old voice that asked him over and over again, do I speak or do I spare them? Do I carry this again or do I finally let it land? She cleared her throat. I've already notified the pilot of the delay. She said, we are taking this seriously. And if I may I ask what your position is exactly with the FAA? Julian turned toward the window. Outside, the plane sat idle. The bridge had not connected yet. He spoke without turning back. I was a principal contributor to the 2024 Oversight Reallocation Clause, the one that mandates digital justification logs for business class reassignments. Noelle stared at him. You wrote that clause? Julian nodded once. I wrote the draft. Oversight Ethics Panel passed it unanimously. Noelle exhaled slowly. Then, you know this shouldn't have happened. Julian finally turned back to face her. Yes, he said, and yet it still did. The room went quiet. Noelle reached for the terminal keyboard and typed quickly. She pulled up the manifest. Your original seat. 3A. Confirmed. She tapped again. Reassign manually. No justification entry. It should have triggered a conflict warning. Julian raised an eyebrow. Unless it was done on override access. Noelle's fingers froze. That level of access was restricted to supervisory permissions. She looked up. I need a moment, she said, standing. Julian didn't respond. He returned his gaze to the window. In the distance, passengers milled near the windows, watching the tarmac. He could see them through the frosted glass, phones in hand, heads shaking, mouths whispering. This wasn't about going viral. It was about the quiet ways power chose who mattered. A knock again. Noelle returned. She had someone with her now. Captain Ron Madsen. Tall, broad shoulders, crisp uniform, silver hair combed back. He walked in like a man used to authority. Mr. Cross, he said, extending a hand. Julian shook it. The captain looked around. We're aware of the delay. I've been briefed, Julian said. Have you, Madsen, met his eyes? I was told there was a boarding conflict. We'll get you back to your seat. First class if needed. Julian shook his head slowly. This isn't about upgrades. Madsen hesitated. Then what is it about Julian's voice lowered? It's about accountability. About who gets questioned, who gets believed, and who gets quietly removed without being asked if they belong. The room froze. Noelle looked at the captain, then back at Julian. He stepped closer now, holding their gaze. If this happened to someone without credentials, would you be standing here right now? Neither answered. Julian leaned forward. This is not a PR moment. This is a systems moment. Noelle nodded slowly. Captain Madsen cleared his throat. We'll delay departure until this is addressed fully. Julian looked at him one last time. Good, because I haven't grounded the plane yet, but I can. The red light above gate A14 blinked 3 times. Then it turned yellow. Passengers in the waiting area looked up, puzzled. The boarding lane had gone still. No agents were calling group numbers anymore. No scanner beeps, no flight announcements. Just a quiet vacuum of confusion hanging in the air. In row 4, Tiana Rhodes lifted her phone a little higher. Y'all, she whispered into her live stream mic. They stopped the boarding. For real. She pointed the camera toward the jet bridge. Still closed. Nobody going in or out. She tapped the screen twice to zoom. Okay. Now 2 gate agents just walked away from the desk. One of them looks pale, like he saw a ghost. The comments section was climbing. Hundreds watching now, dozens typing. He got him shook. Who is this man for? That's how you stand your ground. Tiana tilted the phone toward her own face. I don't know what's about to happen, but if you're just joining... Short version, they bumped this black guy out of business class, gave it to a white exec, and didn't even check who he was. She paused. And now, they do. Just then, a new announcement came through the overhead speakers. Attention passengers of Flight 3827 to Chicago. Your departure has been temporarily delayed due to operational review. Please remain in the boarding area. Further updates will follow shortly. Gas rippled through the gate. Whispers. Delayed. Operational review. That wasn't weather. That wasn't mechanical. That was internal. David Kincaid, the executive who had accepted Julian's seat, was now pacing near the windows. He clutched his phone tightly, muttering, I don't know. They just said it's delayed. No, they didn't say why. Look, I didn't ask for the seat. I just accepted it. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes scanning, as if looking for someone to blame or something to disappear into. At the far end of the terminal, a woman with a purple scarf leaned toward her granddaughter. Did you look him up yet? She asked. The girl tapped rapidly on her screen, eyes scanning. I'm trying. Hold on. I think his name is Julian Cross. The grandmother straightened. Spell it. The girl did. 3 results came up instantly. She gasped. Grandma, he runs some kind of aviation company. Which one? Equifly Systems. They designed flight routing AI and compliance monitoring tech. The grandmother raised her eyebrows. That ain't no passenger. That's a system maker. Meanwhile, inside the corridor, Julian remained standing. Noel Jennings had stepped out to take a call. Captain Madsen stood near the desk, reading a message on his tablet. His jaw was clenched. He looked up. You said you haven't grounded the plane yet? Julian nodded. And now Julian pulled a second phone from his coat pocket. This one's smaller. Steel frame. No case. He unlocked it, tapped once. A call rang out. DGA Regulatory Ops. A voice answered. This is Cross, Julian said. Gate A14, Delta Flight 3rd I-27. Reassignment of FAA flagged passenger without manifest verification. No justification entry. Possible override without audit trail. I am invoking Clause 14F under regulatory review. The voice on the other end replied instantly. Understood. Issuing stop order now. Expect compliance delay confirmation within 3 minutes. Julian ended the call, then turned to Madsen. I've done what I needed to do. The captain didn't move, but his eyes said everything. He'd lost command of his own plane. Outside, the red line above the gate turned solid. A moment later, the terminal speakers crackled again. Attention passengers. Flight 3rd I-27 is now under federal compliance hold. Please remain seated in the boarding area. We appreciate your patience. Phones were raised everywhere now. Passengers stared. Tiana's stream passed 2,000 viewers. A new comment appeared. He grounded the flight. No cap. Another read Julian Cross just humbled the whole airline. In silence. At the gate desk, Rebecca Slade stood frozen. Her headset buzzed, but she wasn't responding. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked at the empty podium, at the silent scanner, at the red light over the gate door. She tapped her mic. I didn't know, she whispered. They didn't tell me who he was. I just saw, I followed protocol. On the other side of the glass, Julian was writing something in a small black notebook. A name, a time, 3 letters, F-A-A. A. He tapped the notebook once with his pen, then closed it. Captain Madsen stared at him. "You're really doing this?" Julian looked up. "No. Captain, I already did it." A voice buzzed through Madsen's headset. "Urgent." He pressed his earpiece in. "This is Madsen." He answered. "Yes, I understand." "No, I'm standing right in front of him. He hasn't left the terminal." He turned toward Julian again. "They're asking to speak with you directly." Julian nodded. He walked to the desk, took the receiver. "This is Cross." He listened, then spoke slowly. "Yes. Control has been established." "No. This is not a request. This is a report. Action has already been taken." He paused, then added, "If institutional cooperation is not provided in the next 8 minutes, this event escalates to board-level review." He handed the phone back. Madsen looked like he'd aged 10 years. Julian returned to the window, looked out at the plane. It hadn't moved. Passengers inside were now peering out. Word was spreading through the cabin. He exhaled slowly, letting his shoulders drop, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. This wasn't about a seat. It never was. This was about what happens when systems forget they serve people, and what people must do to remind them. Behind him, the terminal had gone still. Not silent, just still, as if everyone was waiting for someone to speak. Julian didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His silence had already become the loudest voice in the room. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Julian stood in the small interior conference room tucked just past the jetway corridor. The lighting was slightly dimmer, the air cooler. A whiteboard hung blank on the wall. A table with 4 chairs sat in the center. Nothing on it except a laminated safety procedure and a small container of pens. He didn't sit. Noelle Jennings entered seconds later, her tablet in hand. She was followed by a man in a navy blazer, thinning hair, and a visible tension in his jaw. "Mr. Cross," she began, voice lower now. "This is Marcus Velt, Assistant Director of Passenger Affairs. He's taking over the internal coordination for the incident." Julian gave a brief nod. Velt did not offer a hand. He opened with a statement instead. "We'd like to keep this from becoming a federal escalation." Julian raised an eyebrow. Not surprise, just acknowledgement. "You're already past that point," he replied. Velt shifted, clearly uncomfortable. Noelle moved toward the table, pulled out a chair. "We've pulled the security logs. Your original seat, 3A, was reallocated under override clearance. No proper documentation, no conflict check. It's a serious error." Julian glanced toward the window overlooking the tarmac. The plane still hadn't moved. "It's more than an error," he said softly. "It's a breach." Velt frowned. "We've reactivated your seat. We can get you on board within the next few minutes." Julian turned to face him directly. "You think this is about reboarding?" Velt hesitated. "It's part of the resolution." Julian exhaled, slow and steady. "Your gate agent reassigned my seat without protocol. Then, when challenged, insisted I step aside without checking the manifest. That wasn't a glitch. That was a system behaving exactly as it was taught to behave." Noelle stiffened. Velt opened his mouth, then closed it again. Julian continued, his voice firm, but even. "I didn't ask for special treatment. I asked for acknowledgement. I asked for the standard process you apply to everyone who fits your mental image of who belongs in a seat like mine." He stepped toward the table now, but didn't sit. "I don't want an apology," he said. "I want a conversation. about equity, about compliance, about the way you operate when no one's recording. Velt folded his arms, clearly defensive now. And if we agree to that conversation, he said carefully, will you release the hold on the flight? Julian walked to the window and rested one hand lightly against the glass. He could see the pilot through the front window of the aircraft, speaking into his radio. He didn't answer Velt directly. Instead, he said, do you know what Clause 14F requires under a compliance hold? Noel answered quietly. An internal systems report, passenger manifest, justification logs, pilot verification, gate communication transcripts. Minimum review time is 30 minutes. Julian nodded. That's how long you have. Noel blinked. Until what? He turned back to face them. Until this becomes public record. Velt stepped forward. Mr. Cross, I don't think you understand the position. This puts the airline, and Julian cut him off with a raised hand. Not sharp, just final. No, he said. You don't understand the position your airline put me in. Velt opened his mouth again, but Noel put a hand on his arm. Gently, firmly. We'll begin the report, she said, not asking permission. Julian looked at her, and for a moment, her eyes softened. I've been in this job for 12 years, she said. I've seen a lot of delays, a lot of escalations, but never one that stopped time like this. Julian finally moved toward the chair and sat, but he didn't relax. He opened his notebook again, wrote something at the top of the page. A14 compliance hold initiated, 2. 14 p.m. beneath it. He drew a line, then began listing bullet points, names, timestamps, decisions. Noel and Velt moved to the terminal computer on the far wall. They began pulling logs, screenshots, and internal communications. The printer clicked on. Pages began to spit out. Julian listened. He listened the way a strategist listens, not for words, but for gaps, for hesitations, for the silence that surrounds institutional language. He flipped to a fresh page in the notebook and wrote a single phrase. Not accidental. Systemic. Then he looked up. You know what I'd like, he asked. They both paused. I'd like your training manual. Noel tilted her head. Excuse me. Julian nodded calmly. The one your agents are required to read during onboarding. I want to see the section on priority seating reassignment. The wording, the phrasing, the implicit cues. Velt frowned. That's internal documentation. Julian smiled. So was the seat reassignment. And yet here we are. Noel looked at Velt. He said nothing. Julian reached into his briefcase and pulled out a file folder. Inside copies of compliance memos he helped write. FAA protocols with his name in the margin. Policy drafts. Audit guidelines. He placed them gently on the table. This isn't about me being inconvenienced, he said. It's about trust, and you lost it. So now I need to see how deep the breach goes. Noel took the file, scanned the first page. Her eyes widened. You helped author this. Julian nodded once. Velt stepped back like the room had shifted under his feet. The printer clicked again. More logs, more time codes. Outside the room, the terminal remained frozen in a strange hush. Passengers had stopped talking. Even the babies had stopped crying. They were watching something unfold without knowing exactly what it was. A reckoning. A moment where someone who had always been quiet decided to speak not with volume, but with precision. Inside the room, Noel handed Julian a printed packet, our training material. Unedited, Julian took it, began reading. page by page, red pen in hand, underlining phrases, circling contradictions, making notes in the margins. Time passed, but no one rushed. This wasn't about rushing anymore. It was about recording. Because repair doesn't begin with a public statement. It begins with a private admission that something was broken long before it was caught. Julian sat quietly in the corner of the room. The air had gone still. Noelle and Marcus were still gathering logs and printing reports, their hushed voices trading terms like authorization code and internal override flag. But Julian wasn't listening anymore. Not to them. He was listening inward, to a voice that had been with him for decades. Not angry, not loud, just ever present. He remembered the first time he'd heard it. He was 12 years old, standing outside a library in Birmingham. A security guard had stopped him at the door, told him he must have wandered into the wrong building, asked if he was looking for the service entrance. Julian remembered how his mother had reacted, not with a scream, not with tears. She had simply placed her hand gently on Julian's shoulder, looked the man in the eye, and said, "My son doesn't enter through the back. He's here to read, not clean." They never raised their voices. They didn't have to. He never forgot that moment, not because it was unique, but because it became the first of many. Julian looked down at the red pen in his hand, paused at a line in the training document that read, "Agent discretion applies when balancing priority seating with flight punctuality." He circled the phrase agent discretion, then underlined it, twice. There it is again, he thought, the loophole, the polite veil over bias, the polite way to remove someone while pretending you're not. He leaned back slightly in the chair, his eyes on the wall, but his mind far from the room. He thought about his early days at the Department of Transportation, the endless policy memos, the quiet resistance from within, the colleagues who smiled but never made room for his voice, and the ones who did only when it made them look good. He had learned quickly that power, when quiet, could either be ignored or feared. He chose the latter. A voice inside whispered again, "You could have let this one go." He breathed in through his nose. Maybe. But then again, maybe this wasn't just his. Maybe it belonged to every passenger who had ever been told to step aside. Every kid who learned too early how to swallow discomfort. Every professional who booked a business class seat only to be asked again if they were sure. Julian opened a new page in his notebook. At the top, he wrote, "I didn't come here to fly. I came to witness." He tapped the pen lightly on the paper. One beat, then another. He looked up at Noelle, who had stopped mid-task, watching him now. There was a question in her eyes. She walked closer. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked. Julian nodded once. "Not like this," he said. "But yes, many times." Noelle sat across from him, tentative. "This isn't just about gate agents," she said. "No," Julian replied. "It's about structures." She lowered her voice. "We're trained to move fast, prioritize operations over nuance, but we're also taught what priority looks like." Julian tilted his head. "And what does it look like?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Julian continued reading the training manual. Every third paragraph had some phrase like, "at the discretion of the agent," or "based on visible credentials," or "within standard appearance of priority travel." He marked them all, red ink bleeding across the page like veins. "I used to think policy could fix everything," he said. Noelle watched him, "but policy is just the bones." Julian continued. If the muscles around it are broken, it doesn't matter. She shifted in her chair. I don't think I've ever seen someone take a delay and turn it into an audit. Julian looked at her gently. This isn't an audit, he said. This is a reckoning. He stood again, walked to the window, looked out across the tarmac. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the concrete. Passengers inside the plane were still seated, waiting, watching. Some pressed phones to the glass. Others sat quietly, as if sensing the gravity of what was unfolding beyond the curtain. Julian could feel the weight of it. But for once, he didn't resent it. He embraced it. His whole life had prepared him for this moment. Not the drama of it, not the visibility, but the stillness inside the fire. He turned back toward Noelle. Tell me, he asked, do you believe change starts from policy or people? She took a long breath. I used to say policy. She admitted. It felt safer, cleaner. And now she glanced down at the manual still marked up in red. Now, I'm starting to think it starts the moment someone refuses to sit down. Julian smiled. Just slightly. He didn't want to be anyone's hero, but he wasn't going to disappear into compliance anymore either. The page in his notebook stared back at him. This is not about revenge. It's about repair. A sharp ding echoed from the overhead speaker just outside the small office. A pause. Then a voice came through the terminal. Captain Ronald Madsen. Please report to Gate A14 immediately, inside the room. Noelle glanced at Julian. Julian didn't look up. He was still circling phrases in the training manual. Another line, another note. Red pen in steady rhythm. Noelle stood. That'll be him. Julian nodded once. Let's see what leadership looks like. The door opened before she could answer. Captain Madsen stepped in like he owned the room. His uniform was flawless. Crisp stripes, gold wings pinned high. He carried himself with the confidence of a man who had landed jets in storms and calmed passengers with a smile. But this wasn't a cockpit, and his authority was about to meet something stronger. Julian stood. Madsen walked forward and extended his hand. Mr. Cross, I understand you're the reason we're not pushing back yet. Julian took the handshake. Firm, polite. Not quite, he said. I'm the reason is being addressed. The pilot tilted his head. I'm told there was a seat mix-up, and that it's been resolved. Julian raised an eyebrow. A mix-up is a mistyped name. This was a reassignment without cause. I can't speak for the gate team, Madsen replied, but I can say our priority is getting this aircraft in the air safely and promptly. Julian looked him over. Measured. You read your flight plan this morning. Madsen nodded. Of course. Good, Julian said, because I helped write the compliance procedure your flight plan is built on. The air shifted. Madsen blinked. Noelle quietly moved to the wall. Julian stepped toward the desk and opened his folder. Inside, neatly stacked, were documents bearing FAA headers, some with stamps, some with annotations, all of them signed by him. He pulled one from the middle and handed it to Madsen. This is a memo from Q2 this year, Julian said, mandating that any seat reassignment for federally flagged passengers be justified digitally within 15 minutes of gate change. Madsen stared at the paper. You're saying this wasn't logged, Julian shook his head. Not only was it not logged, it was overridden manually. Without audit trigger, Noelle confirmed quietly. We pulled the manifest. There's no record. Madsen stiffened. Julian didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there. The man in the tailored jacket, with the calm voice and the deeper reach, Madsen set the paper down. "This is a complicated system, Mr. Cross." "No," Julian replied. "It's a clear one. It just wasn't followed." The silence stretched. Outside the glass wall, more passengers had gathered. Phones were up again. Tiana's live stream had passed 4,000 viewers. Julian didn't look toward the terminal, but he felt their eyes. And he felt something else. The temptation to let the moment become about pride. But this wasn't pride. This was responsibility. "Captain," Julian said evenly, "before this escalates further, I need to ask you a question." Madsen folded his arms. "Ask it. Who initiated the decision to remove me from seat 3A? The captain didn't answer right away. "I don't have that information." Julian nodded. "Then that's a problem." "Why?" "Because if it wasn't you," Julian said, "and it wasn't the manifest system, and it wasn't documented, then we have a systems failure, and you're the final authority before departure." Madsen's face paled slightly. Noel spoke, voice soft but steady. "He's right. Under FAA audit protocol, lack of reassignment logs on federally flagged passengers is an automatic red flag." Julian stepped forward again. "I don't want to embarrass your team," he said, "but I will not board a flight led by a command structure that refuses accountability." Madsen opened his tablet, typed something in, scanned the results. There it was. Julian Cross, FAA Ethics Committee, Lead Contributor, Passenger Rights Protocol, 2023 to 2025. Madsen stepped back without realizing it. That was the moment everything shifted. He wasn't looking at a passenger anymore. He was looking at a regulator. Noel handed Madsen another sheet, the reassignment log, one line, manual change, no ID verification, no explanation. Madsen looked up slowly. "What do you want me to do?" Julian met his gaze. "Step aside." The captain blinked. "I'm the pilot." "You were," Julian said, "until your oversight failed to protect federal procedure." Noel hesitated. "Julian." But Julian held up a hand. "This isn't personal. It's procedural." He turned back to the pilot. "Until your role is reviewed, you are not cleared for this flight." Madsen didn't argue. He just stood there for a long moment, then nodded and left. Noel exhaled. "Are you always this? Surgical?" Julian gave a faint smile. "No, only when they try to fly without reading the rules." Julian Cross sat back down at the conference table. His hand rested gently on the black leather folder in front of him. It didn't look like much from the outside. No fancy logos, no flashy hardware. Just a matte finish, a tight clasp, and a sense of quiet permanence. Noelle Jennings stood nearby, her arms loosely crossed, eyes watching him carefully. Across the room, Marcus Velt had returned with a printed copy of the internal reassignment chain. He set it down with a subtle thud. Unlogged, no terminal trigger, accessed under supervisor override. Julian didn't respond right away. He unlatched the folder, opened it. Inside were a dozen neatly organized documents. Tabs, notes, color-coded markings in blue, green, and red. He pulled out the first one. It was a copy of the FAA Civil Passenger Protection Act, with annotations. He slid it across the table toward Noel. "Section 4, line 11, he said. "You'll find the wording changed in 2023. I proposed that amendment myself." She skimmed it, eyes narrowing. "Digital logging now mandatory in all reassignments of priority tier passengers. Exemptions require internal clearance and third-party documentation." Julian nodded. He pulled out the second document. Thicker, bound, stamped, Equifly Predictive Allocation Model, White Paper Edition. Velt leaned in. That's proprietary tech, isn't it? Julian smiled faintly. It's mine. They both looked up. I developed the original code during my final year as FAA advisory chair. It analyzes systemic profiling and seat allocation based on race, gender, and perceived class. He let that sink in, Noelle whispered. So you don't just regulate the rules. Julian met her eyes. I wrote them, modeled them, and built the systems to audit them when no one was watching. Velt swallowed hard. Is that what you're doing here? Auditing us. Julian shook his head slowly. No, not yet. He opened a side flap of the folder and pulled out another document. This one had a different seal. Delta United Holdings, Inc. Board access registration. Noelle's face went still. Julian gently slid the page across the table. I acquired controlling interest in your holding company 11 months ago. Velt stared at the page. No, that's not. Julian tapped a section near the bottom. Morrison Strategic Oversight Group, Minority Stake Consolidation. His name sat below it, printed in clean serif font. Julian Cross, 6.3% controlling equity. Noelle stepped back, like the paper might burn. You're a board-level stakeholder. Julian nodded once. And now I'm invoking my audit authority. He wasn't loud. He didn't flinch, but the room froze. The only sound was the low hum of the air vent overhead and the whisper of pages settling as Noelle slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. Tiana's live stream outside had passed 6,000 viewers. Comment after comment flashed across her screen. He owns part of the airline. Bro didn't buy a seat. He bought the company. Julian Cross is what quiet power looks like. Oh, back in the room. Julian turned the page. This is an internal memo draft. It outlines my proposed enforcement of Phase 1 reforms, mandatory bias audits, required justification review boards, civil rights officers present in every terminal. Noelle blinked. You're activating that today, Julian looked at her. Calm. Clear. You forced me to. Velt sat down. For the first time, his voice shook. What do you want from us? Julian leaned forward. Transparency, structural correction, and accountability from the top down. Noelle nodded, almost instinctively. Julian wasn't finished. He flipped to another document. This one, he said, is a summary of seating reassignments across this airline's domestic fleet over the last 90 days, pulled from public flight data, matched against surname demographics and frequent flyer status. Noelle's jaw tightened. You did this research yourself. Julian didn't answer. He didn't need to. He let the silence speak. I found a statistically significant correlation. He continued. Black and brown passengers with equal or higher booking class were reassigned at nearly twice the rate of white passengers. Even in verified ticket conditions, Velt looked nauseous. Julian closed the folder. This is what happens when bias becomes embedded in procedure, and no one checks the gatekeeper. Noelle spoke softly. What happens now? Julian stood. He slid the folder back into his briefcase. I'm going to reboard that plane. He looked at her. But not because I trust you fixed anything. He paused. I'm boarding because now, you know that I know. And from this point forward, every gate, every override, every line of code that tries to erase someone will have my fingerprint waiting to trace it. The door opened behind them. An agent stepped in. Captain replacement has arrived. They're requesting confirmation to prepare the cabin. Julian turned to Noelle. I assume there's no objection. She shook her head quickly. No, sir. Julian walked to the door, then stopped. He turned back toward them one last time. Consider this your final warning." He didn't say it with anger. He said it like someone who had seen enough, someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. And then, without another word, Julian Cross stepped back into the terminal, and the world beyond the folder began to shift. The terminal wasn't quiet anymore. It wasn't loud either. It was something else, like air holding its breath. Passengers near gate A14 had stopped checking their watches. They weren't asking about boarding groups or departure times anymore. They were watching one man, Julian Cross. He stepped through the glass corridor and into the waiting area, briefcase in one hand, calm expression unchanged. Tiana Rhodes turned her phone to follow him. "He's back," she whispered to her viewers. "And everybody's pretending they're not staring. But they are. In the corner, the original gate agent, Rebecca Slade, sat on a bench. Her headset rested on her lap. Her eyes were red, hands folded tightly. She whispered into her phone, again and again, I didn't know who he was." A young man beside her glanced up from his screen. "That's the problem," he said softly. Julian stood near the glass wall, watching the runway. The replacement captain had just arrived. Mid-40s, Latino, steady posture, clipboard in hand. He was briefed quickly by a senior staff member, his eyes drifting toward Julian as they spoke. Then a man in a dark gray blazer arrived at the gate counter. He didn't wear a uniform. He didn't need to. Every agent stood straighter the moment he walked in. He was from the airline's corporate operations office, a regional director. No name badge, just presence. He didn't introduce himself. He walked straight to Julian. "Mr. Cross," he said, voice low, rehearsed. "Corporate has asked me to extend our deepest apologies. We're prepared to fully restore your seat and issue immediate policy review across all priority boarding processes." Julian didn't turn to face him. He kept his eyes on the tarmac. Then he replied, "Too late for apologies." The man adjusted his stance. "We're fully prepared to make this right." Julian finally looked at him. "This isn't about making it right," he said. "It's about never letting it be wrong again." The man nodded once. Understood. Julian tilted his head. "Do you?" The man hesitated, then said, "We've also been informed of your position within the holding group." Julian raised one eyebrow. "I assume that changed the tone of the conversation upstairs." "It did," the man admitted. "Legal is preparing a response plan as we speak." Julian didn't smile. He didn't flinch. He just replied, "Tell them to read Clause 6.3 of the Shareholder Compliance Charter." The man's brow furrowed slightly. Julian continued, "Any equity stakeholder exceeding 5% is granted full observational authority during on-site incidents involving procedural breach. If that breach intersects with federal policy, shareholder oversight becomes active enforcement." The man stared. Julian leaned closer. "That means I'm not a bystander. I'm not a victim. I'm an instrument." Phones lifted across the terminal again. Passengers weren't just curious now. They were witnessing something shift. A black man standing alone in a sea of authority. Not shouting, not demanding, just correcting. "I'll inform the board liaison," the man said quietly. Julian nodded. "And inform your ethics officer. Starting tomorrow, I'll require direct communication with every gate compliance trainer across this region." The man blinked. All of them, Julian said. "And I'll be reviewing how your agents are taught to identify authority, courtesy, and credibility without defaulting to color." From the far side of the seating area, an elderly woman stood slowly. Mrs. Laverne Pollard, purple scarf, wide eyes, firm voice. She stepped closer to Julian and said gently, "Son." He turned toward her. "I don't know what all you did," she continued, "but I know it's something that matters." Julian looked into her eyes. "I didn't plan for this," he said. She gave a soft smile. "That's why it's working." Behind them, the operations supervisor reappeared. She approached Julian with a small packet in hand. "Sir, this contains your reissued boarding pass, the written incident acknowledgement, and the initial copy of the audit trail." Julian took the envelope but didn't open it. Instead, he asked, "Has the original gate agent been relieved from duty?" The supervisor nodded. "Effective immediately. She's off the roster." Julian didn't gloat. He didn't nod in satisfaction. He simply said, "I hope someone teaches her what was missing." The supervisor replied softly, "She's learning already?" Tiana's phone was still recording. Her voice whispered, "He's not just resetting the flight. He's resetting the whole system." Julian turned back toward the glass. The runway was golden now, lit by the late afternoon sun. One hand rested on the handle of his briefcase. The other held the envelope. But he didn't rush. Not toward boarding. Not toward closure. He waited, because some moments require silence to sink in. And this was one of them. A gate agent whispered into her mic, "Compliance HQ confirms cross-hold shareholder enforcement clearance." Another replied, "We've never seen this before." A third said, "Get legal. Now." In the air, nothing had changed, but on the ground, everything had. Julian Cross didn't speak right away. He stood by the gate window, one hand resting on the handle of his briefcase, the other holding the sealed envelope the supervisor had just given him. Behind him, the air buzzed with soft murmurs. Passengers watched. Staff stood frozen. Phones continued to record. Everyone was waiting for his next move. Julian turned around slowly and walked back toward the gate counter. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. But every step he took carried weight. When he reached the podium, he set the envelope down on the counter. The regional operations manager, still standing nearby, watched him carefully. Julian opened the envelope. He removed the boarding pass first, then the incident report, then a single white sheet tucked in the back. It was blank. He looked at the supervisor. "This," he said, lifting the blank page, "is the most important paper in this packet." She looked confused. Julian continued, "This is where we begin." The room was quiet again. He spoke with calm clarity. "I'm not interested in apologies. I'm not interested in vouchers or credits or back-channel promises." He tapped the page. "I'm interested in correction, documented, verified, enforced." The supervisor nodded slowly. Julian picked up a pen from the counter and began to write. He spoke each item aloud as he wrote. "First," he said, "this airport will assign a designated compliance officer to every gate during boarding procedures within 3 weeks." The operations manager swallowed. Julian kept writing. "Second, you will begin an internal review of all seating reassignments from the past 90 days. Identify racial, gender, and class-based patterns. Deliver that audit to the Federal Oversight Committee within 5 business days." He looked up. "Third, all gate agents must undergo equity and procedural discretion training, not just annual refreshers, mandatory retraining, every quarter." The supervisor wrote this down as he spoke. Passengers listened. Phones rolled. Julian kept his voice steady. "Fourth, you will establish a civil rights assurance desk inside this terminal. A real desk, with real authority. Not a pamphlet, not a QR code. A human being who can act." He paused, then added, And I want a direct liaison assigned to my office for every operational update during the rollout of these changes." The manager blinked. All of that, Julian looked him dead in the eyes. Every word. He handed the sheet to the supervisor. It was no longer blank. It was a declaration. She took it with both hands like it weighed more than paper. He wasn't done. "One more thing," he said. Everyone leaned in. Julian turned toward the captain's door, where the replacement pilot was being briefed. Then he looked back to the podium. Any crew member, at any level, flagged in a shareholder-triggered compliance event, is to be temporarily relieved from duty pending investigation, effective immediately. The supervisor glanced toward the hallway where the original pilot, Captain Madsen, had vanished earlier. "I assume that has been handled?" Julian asked. The supervisor nodded. "Yes, sir. He's been removed from the flight manifest." Julian exhaled quietly. Not relief, not satisfaction, just confirmation. He picked up his boarding pass again. The supervisor took a step closer. "Would you like us to pre-board you?" Sir Julian looked around. At the passengers, at the crew, at the agents standing behind the counter with earpieces buzzing, waiting for instructions. Then he said, "Clearly I will board when everyone else does." The room shifted. Passengers exchanged glances. Someone whispered, "He's one of us." Another said, "He didn't take power to rise above. He used it to pull the floor up for everyone." The gate agent cleared her throat and raised the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "we will now resume boarding for Flight 3027 to Chicago. All passengers may now proceed according to their original boarding groups. No group number was called first. Just everyone, together." Julian stepped aside. Let others go before him. He waited until Tiana, still holding her phone, reached the gate. She lowered the camera as she passed him. "Thank you," she said quietly. Julian nodded. Behind her, the elderly woman with the purple scarf, Mrs. Laverne Pollard, approached him again. "You did what needed to be done," she said. "And you did it without shouting," Julian replied softly. "Sometimes silence makes more noise." Then he stepped into the jet bridge. No one clapped, no one cheered, but every step he took felt like something new was walking with him. A different air, a different standard, a new floor being laid beneath old rules. The boarding tunnel glowed with late afternoon light. Julian Cross walked slowly, letting the hush wrap around him. The floor vibrated gently under each step. The smell of jet fuel and stale air mixed with something new anticipation. He didn't hurry. Ahead of him, families and solo travelers shuffled forward, still whispering about what they'd witnessed at the gate. Some stole glances over their shoulders. Others avoided looking back, pretending not to care. But their eyes flickered, restless. As Julian reached the threshold of the aircraft door, the replacement Captain Rodriguez, according to the stitched name tag, stood waiting with a respectful nod. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Cross," he said, voice steady, careful. Julian nodded, offering a polite smile. "Thank you, Captain." Rodriguez stepped aside, holding the door wide. No fanfare, no forced apology, just a gesture that said, "I see you." Inside the plane, the energy had shifted. Flight attendants greeted him with measured, almost solemn faces. Some, who'd watched the drama unfold from the galley, gave quiet nods. Julian turned down the business class aisle. Seat 3A, still empty, untouched. He set his bag in the overhead bin, took his time. He pressed his jacket flat and then sat, the cool leather feeling both familiar and changed. For a long moment, He just breathed. He looked around at the passengers already seated. No one made eye contact directly, but he could sense them watching. A young man in 3B adjusted his tie. An older woman 2 rows back folded her hands, lips pressed together as if in prayer. Even the business traveler, David Kincaid, the man who'd unknowingly been given Julian's seat, offered a small, embarrassed smile from across the aisle. Julian nodded back. No anger, no blame, only recognition. He pulled out his notebook and opened to the last page he'd written on. For a few seconds, he stared at the lines of red ink notes, demands, reminders. You are not here to fly. You are here to land something larger. The boarding continued. Passengers shuffled down the aisle, filling the space with low voices and the familiar thud of roller bags. Julian sat with his back straight, hands folded in his lap, waiting. Tiana Rhodes appeared, eyes bright behind her phone, now lowered respectfully. She passed his seat, paused, and mouthed, "You did it?" Julian smiled, a small, private smile meant just for her. Tiana found her seat further back and tucked her phone away, for once letting the story happen without a lens between her and the world. Near the back, Mrs. Laverne Pollard moved carefully toward him. She stopped at his row, steadying herself with a hand on the seat. "Mr. Cross," she said quietly. Julian looked up. "I just wanted to say thank you," she continued, "for everyone who ever sat down quietly and took it." "You didn't." He closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words land. "Thank you, ma'am," he said gently. "But it's not just about not taking it. It's about making sure the next person doesn't have to, either." She smiled a real, full smile and made her way to her seat. The flight attendant came by to offer him a drink. Julian declined, but she lingered for a moment. "I was in the back earlier," she said softly. "I saw what happened." Her voice shook, but she kept going. I've seen it before, but I've never seen anyone stand that calm or make it change." Julian met her eyes. "You shouldn't have to see it at all," he said. She nodded, a tear catching in her lashes. He watched her move down the aisle, shoulders straighter. Outside, the sun was dropping lower, gold spilling across the runway. The captain's voice came on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during our extended boarding. We appreciate your understanding and are honored to have you flying with us today. Please fasten your seatbelts as we prepare for departure. No corporate apology, no forced PR statement, just a tone of respect that wasn't there before." Julian watched as the last passenger took their seat. The doors closed with a solid thud. Engines hummed to life. He leaned back, finally letting the fatigue of the day touch him. He closed his eyes for a moment and pictured his mother's hand on his shoulder, steadying him in every storm. This isn't about being seen, he thought. It's about making sure the next door is already open. The plane taxied away from the gate, rolling slowly toward the runway. People settled in. The hum of the cabin rose and fell, but something softer lingered beneath the knowledge that something meaningful had happened here, even if not everyone could name it. Julian opened his notebook one last time. On a clean page, he wrote today, "I reclaimed a seat, but more than that, I reclaimed the rules. And tomorrow, no one will forget." He closed the cover and set it in his lap. As the aircraft picked up speed, lifting into the deepening dusk, Julian looked out at the world below, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to rest. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. For a heartbeat, The whole plane seemed to hold its breath as the runway rushed beneath them and the engines whispered their relief. Then, a light shudder as the brakes caught and the aircraft slowed, coasting toward its gate. Julian Cross opened his eyes. He hadn't slept, but his rest felt real. The hush in his chest had grown lighter, the heavy ache between his shoulders replaced by something more open possibility. Outside, dusk had deepened to blue. Gate lights glowed like lanterns, illuminating the faces of ground crew waving signals and rolling up the jet bridge. A final page turned on the day. Around him, passengers gathered themselves, clicking seatbelts open, reaching overhead for bags, murmuring in quiet voices. Some smiled at him as they passed. Others gave small nods, a kind of silent acknowledgement that needed no words. Julian sat for a moment longer, letting the aisle clear. The flight attendant came by, offering a gentle smile. "We're at the gate, Mr. Cross." "Thank you," Julian said, voice warm. She hesitated. I just want you to know, you made a difference, not just for yourself, for all of us." He met her eyes. "We all did. You saw it. You told the truth." She smiled wider and turned away, heading back to the galley. Julian stood, collecting his jacket and briefcase. He stepped into the aisle, feeling the faint vibration of the plane beneath his feet. He moved with unhurried grace, pausing at the galley to thank the crew. As he reached the front, Captain Rodriguez was waiting. "Sir," he said quietly, "I read your policy papers back in training. I never thought I'd see one come alive." Julian's smile was gentle. The rules are only alive when the people believe in them. Rodriguez nodded, offering his hand. Julian shook it, feeling the weight of a shared understanding pass between them. Stepping onto the jet bridge, Julian was greeted by a familiar face. Tiana Rhodes waited near the gate, her phone in her pocket for once, her eyes bright and searching. "Mr. Cross," she called softly. He stopped. "Tiana, thank you for telling the story." She grinned, a little shy for the first time. "My mom says she wants to shake your hand, too. She's waiting at baggage claim." Julian laughed quietly, the sound deep and clean. "I'll be there soon." Further down, Mrs. Laverne Pollard waited in her wheelchair, her granddaughter by her side. Julian stopped, bowing his head in respect. "Thank you, ma'am, for your words today." She reached for his hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "Don't stop now, son." Doors open because someone dares to knock and stand their ground. He smiled. That's a promise. The terminal had changed. There was no music, no grand applause, but the energy felt new. A subtle hopefulness drifted in the air. As Julian walked toward baggage claim, the operations supervisor approached him one final time, holding a fresh copy of the protocol document. "We've sent your demands to corporate. Internal audit will begin in the morning. The Civil Rights Assurance Desk goes live next week." She handed him the sheet, her eyes full of resolve. "I'm holding you to your word, Mr. Cross." Julian nodded. "And I'll hold you to yours." The supervisor smiled, relief and gratitude mingling. He stepped into the wide, open hall beyond security. His phone buzzed with new messages, some from former colleagues, some from reporters already chasing the story. He ignored them for now. Instead, he looked around and simply watched people move, families reuniting, children laughing, tired workers dragging bags. Ordinary moments. But tonight, they felt extraordinary. He found a quiet corner and sat for a moment, feeling the city's heartbeat through the airport floor. He remembered his mother's voice, soft but steady. You are not what they expect. Julian, that's your power. Use it to make them expect more. He wrote one last note in his notebook. Real change doesn't announce itself. It arrives on quiet feet, wears no metal, and leaves a door open behind it. At the far end of the terminal, he spotted Tiana and her mother waving. He stood and walked toward them, his steps lighter than they had been all day. As he left the terminal, night had fully fallen. The city outside buzzed and blinked, endless, alive. For Julian, it wasn't just the end of a journey. It was the beginning of another one where the air felt just a little clearer, the ground just a little fairer beneath his feet. And somewhere, not far away, a new team of agents gathered for a late briefing, reviewing a policy written not in anger, but in clarity. A system had been reminded who it was supposed to serve. A man had claimed his seat, and in doing so, he had changed the course of more than a single flight. Julian Cross stepped outside, drawing a deep breath of night air. He looked up, grateful, certain. The real landing, he knew, was not just for him. It was for everyone who would board tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. He walked toward the waiting city, quiet, steady, and ready for the next door to open. Sometimes, the quietest voices are the ones that echo the longest. Julian Cross didn't raise his voice. He didn't storm the gate. Instead, he stood his ground with dignity, clarity, and the kind of strength that changes more than just a seat. It changes an entire system. This wasn't just about one man or one flight. It was about every moment when someone is told they don't belong. It was about the invisible weight so many carry, and the hope that one act of courage can lift it for others. If this story moved you, let it move you to act. Share this video. Talk about it. Stand up in your own way. For those who are still asked to step aside, we can't erase every injustice overnight, but together we can make it impossible to ignore. Let's promise to never accept silent discrimination. Let's choose compassion, respect, and the kind of accountability that changes more than just policies. It changes hearts. Thank you for watching. If you believe in stories that shine a light on injustice, please like, share, and subscribe. Your voice matters. Stay tuned for more stories that demand to be heard.